But prior to having what I call my midlife crisis of coming to work in the peanut industry, I worked at agcareers.com for nearly 14 years, which is an online job board specifically for the agricultural industry. I hope that some of you maybe have engaged with that at some point through your career journey. And then I had the honor and the privilege of working with AFA for 4 years. And as part of that environment, I worked very closely with our student leaders, both ambassadors and our student advisory team. And that really is where I got some of my first introduction into some of the crucial conversations training. I mean, obviously, I think we're all doing it every day in our day-to-day, and we'll get into that a little bit as we go throughout some of the content this afternoon. I almost said this morning, but this afternoon. And so, really dived in when I was at AFA and participated in what Vital Smarts offers as some of the training to be a coach in the crucial conversation world. And so did that. And then, as I said, I had my midlife crisis and came to work for North Carolina Peanut Growers Association. A big departure from in my previous 2 careers. I had worked primarily with college-age students on professional development and resumes and careers. And now, any of you who have production in your background, are familiar with commodity boards, know that it's a bit of a shift in the clientele. I do have a couple young guys on my board currently, and I'm very excited about that. But when I say young, they're 27, so they're probably about the same age as a lot of you. So not necessarily working in that collegiate environment as much. And so another thing that I didn't put this on this screen, but as far as my background and opportunities for having crucial conversations, you can see there some slides where I've added opportunities to practice the crucial conversation skills. I've also been married for 17 years, and I think that is probably the one day-to-day place where you spend a lot of time in difficult or crucial conversations or just having that dialogue with your spouse. And then a more recent, I'm a pretty transparent person, so I'm going to share this. A more recent life change for me is I have 2 aging parents who are in pretty poor health and have 24-hour caregivers in their home. And I have found myself really kind of using crucial conversation skills in my communication with those caregivers because I am not close to home. I currently live about 3.5 hours away from where my parents are. So there's a lot of dialogue via text, phone calls with those people who are transitioning in and out of my parents' home, helping me care for them. So just, kind of thinking through some of the different ways that I utilize crucial conversations and maybe some of the examples that we'll bring in. But we're going to talk primarily around in the career setting today for crucial conversations. But I told the AFA crowd I was going to do this because I wouldn't be living out my career and what I do if I didn't talk for just a couple of minutes about peanuts, because I'm not sure how many people on this call today are from a peanut producing state or who are familiar with the production of peanuts. And so I want to give you just a little bit of glimpse into the industry that I love working in, that I'm currently getting to engage with growers on a day-to-day basis in promoting and educating people about what I call the filet mignon of peanuts, what we grow here in North Carolina. So number one, first and foremost, peanuts grow under the ground. I did not put an image on here of that, but that is a big message that we do work because there are consumers out there who are not as familiar with the production of peanuts. It is a legume in the same family as soybeans. I know I'm talking to ag folks here today, so hopefully the majority of you knew that they grew under the ground. There are 13 states across the U.S. where peanuts are grown commercially. North Carolina ranks 3rd in production. You'll see maybe on that top little screen, you'll see a 96 of that one graphic, a 96, a 2, and then a 2. So we grow 96% of our crop in North Carolina is the Virginia type peanut. So there are 4 different market types of peanuts that are produced. The Virginia type is known for being larger in nature, in the kernel that's inside of that shell. Often our peanuts end up at the ballpark. I can pretty much assure you that if you've gone to a major league ball game and you've bought a bag of peanuts and cracked them open during the game, those 99% likelihood they came out of North Carolina dirt. That's where the majority of our crop ends up, is roasted in shell. But we also serve the gourmet market. Don't think planters when you think gourmet. Gourmet is like the can that you might get at Christmas, or more like a high-end type of peanut. It's going to be larger. Runners are utilized primarily for peanut butter. And so that is one thing unique about the role that I'm in, is I don't spend a ton of time talking about peanut butter, although it is how the majority of people consume peanuts, is through enjoying peanut butter. But you wouldn't use the filet mignon cut to make that into peanut butter. So you don't see very many of what we grow going into that market. I put a little map on here of where do we grow peanuts in North Carolina, just to kind of give you an idea. We're primarily up and down what's called the I-95 corridor in the eastern part of our state. And then a lot of people don't realize, one of the things that we spend a lot of time in our education is helping people understand how those peanuts got off the farm and into the grocery store or to the ballpark. There's a lot of different factors that go into those peanuts making it to your palate. And they go through a shelling facility. Some are exported, some are crushed, etc. I'm not going to go into all that detail, but I just want to take that little moment to make sure you all knew a couple of fun facts about North Carolina peanuts. Now, I will say, I put this image on here. Mr. Peanut is not the official mascot of the entire industry. That's owned by Hormel, but it is an iconic image, and so I stuck that on there today as well. So let's get started and talk a little bit about let me back up for just a second. I wanted to give a little bit of a disclaimer before we go forward to about this presentation. I was telling Chelsea and Brandon before we got started that you know, when I agreed to do this presentation for AFA, I'm not saying that the atmosphere and the culture of the United States, and really honestly the entire world, wasn't as high as it you know, it was definitely high then, but it has continued to become a more tense environment just here in the last couple of weeks. And so my anxiety about this content kind of has been growing as we've seen everything that's been unfolding in the media and whatnot. And that may be what spurred you to sign up today, because you too finding yourself kind of wrapped up in some of that, what we're hearing in the media, what we're seeing, what we're experiencing. And so as I was getting ready, I was reading back through my Crucial Conversations initial training material that I had, and I read this quote from one of the authors, from Joseph Grenny, who's one of the authors of the Crucial Conversations book and the training that goes along with it. And it's in the very beginning, and he says, the bottom line is this: if you don't talk it out, you will act it out. And that just kind of really sat with me in my reflection. And so, you know, I thought that makes it all the more important that we follow through and have today's dialogue. Not that I would have ever not done that, because those of you who know me on the call probably know that in my top 5 strengths, discipline and responsibility are pretty up there. But it certainly made me think that this content is probably needed more than ever. It's absolutely not going to fix all the problems, but it's just something, a little voice to have in the back of your mind. And my final disclaimer that I wanted to give today, this afternoon, is that I'm not a therapist. I'm not a master communications skills consultant. That is an actual title that I found. But I've just, I'm now, I guess, what you would consider mid-career, and I've had a pretty successful career and a lot of diverse opportunities of working with different people. And when you work with different people, you find yourself in different types of dialogue. And so, you know, that's where some of these examples we're going to go through today. I already told you that I spent a little time in that Crucial Conversations training. So I hope at the end of this, you take away at least a nugget or two that'll help you in your day-to-day conversations that you have in the workplace. So now we've got that out of the way, I want to start with an analogy or a visual. All good trainers, all good presentations maybe start with that. When you're thinking about having a difficult conversation, people often think about broaching that like it's maybe like an argument, that the outcome of having the conversation is going to be one person's going to win and one person's going to lose. I want to challenge you to have a different perspective about crucial conversations. I want you to think of them, of the analogy that you're not going in to win or lose, but that collectively maybe you're working together to unravel a problem or a situation. And so think of the topic that you're wanting to talk to that person about as being like the knot in this image that you see on your screen. That's the topic you're wanting to address. And it's only going to get worse when the two opposing people are pulling against one another, versus approaching that conversation and saying, hey, this is the topic. We got this knot here. Can you help me out? Can you help me? Can we work together to unravel this instead of making it worse, to smooth it out? So hopefully, as you'll keep that in the back of your mind as we go through today, that using the skills that I'm going to review with you, that you can think about your upcoming interactions that you have and the crucial conversations that you maybe are in the back of your mind that you need to approach as coming out with an unraveling of that knot instead of making it worse. So when having or handling crucial or difficult conversations, it is, when you think about that topic, and I think if you tune in to any of the trainings that are out there, or if you find yourself on TikTok searching the topic, it exists in this webinars like what we're doing today, because by and large, people don't really handle them that well. As a society, we struggle. A lot of people, it's part of being emotionally intelligent, being able to have strong conversations. And a lot of people get very nervous, or instead of addressing them, they often just want to avoid altogether. And they lose. And when they do that, if they either avoid it, or if they don't prepare and put in some time to preparing, then whenever they find themselves in that conversation, they may lose control of their emotions. And maybe after the conversation, they end up spending a lot of time just replaying it in their head. And so these are the types of conversations that have a huge impact on you, both professionally and personally. You're finding yourself dialoguing with people about projects, productivity, diversity of work, quality of life, the happiness of your marriage. That's whenever crucial conversations really kind of come into play. And if you aren't prepared, and these are the three words that you see up here, are kind of the three scenarios that they say makes a conversation a crucial conversation: when the stakes are high, when maybe you got opposing opinions, or there's strong emotions involved. And when people aren't prepared to have those conversations, they're going to make mistakes, and that's where you find yourself kind of maybe in a spiral. They talk about in the training or in the book, and I absolutely recommend that you read the book or do some deeper digging on crucial conversations. But they say in there that your body will just, like a natural inherent part of how we are made as humans, is you go into a fight or flight mode when you find yourself approached with one of these situations, and the blood moves away from your brain and into your muscles, and you makes it very difficult to think clearly, which is why it's important to have some trainings like this in your back pocket so that you're better prepared when it happens. They actually call it reptilian brain. That's what happens to you when you're feeling that blood rush out and you go into that flight or fight mode. And you may, that could happen to you also if you're caught off guard, which I think is impossible to avoid. But sometimes, in a stressful situation, we may get defensive, and hopefully some of these strategies will help you to not do that as well. And so in the full crucial conversations training in the book that you may look into, there are 7 different strategies that are covered. And it's not necessarily saying that you're going to utilize all 7 of those strategies in one particular dialogue. But what I've done today is I've pulled out 2 or 3 that I have found the most helpful, and that's what we're going to look at are those specific tool sets that are provided through the training. And again, if you have an opportunity to participate in one of their trainings, what is unique about that is that they do a lot of videos as part of that, and discussion about what did you see good, what did you see bad, and unpacking that, especially in small groups. And that's just really hard to convey in a webinar setting. And so if you, or maybe the organization that you're a part of, has some interest in getting deeper into that, it's a 2-day training. I'm squeezing. Another reason I'm just selecting a couple is we only have a limited amount of time today. And so it's certainly worthwhile. If this is an area where you really want to work to become the best version of yourself, certainly seek out some of that training. Again, it's offered by an organization called Vital Smarts. And I think AFA is going to have more of that maybe built into some of their training in the coming months and years as well. So great that you're already part of this network. So one of the things when you first start off approaching, we talked about like the analogy of the rope and the knot. You and the person that you are dialoguing with, and typically these are conversations that are just had between two people, so we're not necessarily in a large debating environment here, but your goal is to keep the dialogue going. As you're doing that, the one of the things that's going to bring you to the dialogue in the beginning is that you need to identify a mutual goal or a purpose. So I mentioned earlier, like smoothing out the knot in the rope. But, if you think of that from like, what do you want to get out of the conversation? Why are you initiating or participating in that dialogue? Like, what is the ultimate goal? Not again to win or lose, but because you need to be thinking about, well, what does the other person also want? What could we both possibly want, like for our organization as a positive outcome? And that's really creating your number one. It's going to open up to dialogue, but it's also going to lay the groundwork for the intent of that conversation. And as you're thinking about that, so we've got here on the screen is, the common values, common goal, and a common purpose. And communicating those with the other person as you enter into that dialogue with the other person. And then once you've done that, you've engaged in dialogue. And so let's talk about some strategies getting into that dialogue, but also as you're preparing for it, what you need to keep in mind. And so I'm going to transition over to dig a little bit more on that, being prepared ahead of time, and your mental awareness going into a high stakes conversations. So I mentioned that there were 7 different toolkits that they go through in the Crucial Conversations training. 4 of those 7 are focused on your mental preparedness prior to having the conversation. Now, obviously, there's going to be times where you're approached with a conversation or you need to act in the moment, and you're not going to have that same you're not going to have a lot of time to get mentally prepared beforehand. But I think if you're studying this and you're using some of those strategies, it will eventually, practice makes perfect. It will kind of become ingrained in your day-to-day vocabulary and how you interact with other people. But so I'm going to talk a little bit. I wanted to just have this last slide on the importance of preparedness. And we've always, I feel like maybe some of you have heard the saying, it's not what you said, it's how you said it. You've probably heard that before. And that tone and temperature, as you know, if you think about experiences that you've had, can really lead that other person to interpret your comments differently. And so if you've prepared on the front end and you know what the intent of the conversation that you're going into is, and you've thought a little bit through the content that you want to share, it certainly will help with hopefully that other person not misconstruing what you're trying to communicate to them. Another quote from the Crucial Conversations training is that people rarely become defensive about what you're saying, which is the content, but they become defensive because why they think you're saying it. What is in their mind that they're telling themselves as to why you've approached them with that topic. And that can very often lead to a misunderstanding. And so you want to do some safety checks throughout the conversation to make sure that you're staying on track and that they're understanding what you're communicating to them. I've even found myself across my career in moments, and certainly as I became, as I spent more time in my career and working with other people, sitting down with that person or my spouse even and saying, what did you hear me say? Can you say that back to me? And that's a part of your toolkit to utilize to make sure that you are keeping the conversation safe and you're clearing up any of those misconstrued ideas that maybe they're picking up from the intent or the content of your material. So as you go through a conversation, you want to keep both of these in balance. So it's not that one, you've got your content is more important than your intent or what your body language is saying. It's a balance. And so that's what creates that safe environment. And you also want to be looking out for times or part of the conversation when things become unsafe for that person, because it's only going to lead to a breakdown of what you're hoping to accomplish. And obviously body language is a big part of picking up on that, those physically tense moments that may appear, or signs of fear or anger in a person. Maybe their tone does rise in their voice as you are having the communication. They talk a lot in the book about silence and violence, and looking for those two things. And so I know, violence seems like a natural, like we're aware of that, attacking or controlling or labeling type phrases in the communication. But silence can also be a form of that dialogue becoming unsafe. And so if a person is avoiding or withdrawing from the conversation, you want to be aware of that as well, and to make sure that you're kind of doing some temperature checks with the person that you're in dialogue with as part of that. So let's dig into one of the strategies. The first strategy I want to help you to unpack as far as preparing for a crucial conversation. So the stories that we tell ourselves. This is something that I find myself, it's a phrase that is utilized throughout the training. And while I did that training nearly a decade ago, I find myself recalling that term a couple times just to self-check myself, but also other people when I'm in a dialogue. So, this is where sometimes in a conversation, people have made, you're finding yourself in this dialogue either in your own mind or one-on-one with another person because you've told yourself a story about that situation, or you've made an assumption about your relationship with the other person. So an example of that may be, my teammate doesn't care about my projects because they don't come to my meetings that I'm having. Or they don't do the pre-work. We've probably all been engaged in some kind of partner scenario. And so we think that they are not invested in us and they're not invested in the work that we're doing. My boss doesn't seem to care about my career because I'm not getting a promotion. Those are stories that you're telling yourself. There's no facts really involved in that. There are some facts, but not enough that you need to act on those. And so when you're going into a dialogue, so you don't know for a fact that is why they don't attend your meetings. You don't know for a fact that that's why you haven't received a promotion. And so you've told yourself this story in your head, and you want to approach it and have dialogue with that other person about it. But you need to make sure that before you do that, that there's room for dialogue to happen, because your mind is already made up and you need to self-check yourself before you go into that dialogue. You have to assume that you don't know the whole story and you want to invite them to help you to understand that more. So I also note that I think this is exceptionally important, because if I had to pinpoint one reason that I think we often end up with particular outcomes in our career, or we have disgruntledness with another coworker, is because we've made some assumptions and we've told ourselves a story in our minds. And so let's break out an example of seeing that's what you've actually heard and experienced, the story that you're telling yourself, how that makes you feel, and then moving into action and how you can maybe correct that. So you're working on a task and your manager checks up on you 3 times in 1 hour, offering suggestions. That's micromanaging, perhaps is the term that you're thinking of there. So that is what you see and hear in that experience. And then you may tell yourself a story in your mind that you've decided that your manager is questioning your capabilities. She doesn't believe you can complete the task on your own, and she thinks that you're incompetent. So now you're on the verge of spiraling. You know what I meant? Into a really bad place in your own mind. You feel hurt and defensive, and that is making you angry. Your manager obviously hasn't paid attention to the other reports that you've produced in the past that were perfect, because you create perfect. You're producing perfect things for your employer, and so now you're holding a grudge. And you're getting into a bad place with your employer because you don't listen and you don't want to respond to your manager's suggestions anymore. So this is a paralyzing story that you are telling yourself, and you're getting caught up in those emotions rather than the actual facts. And so you need to kind of break those apart. But you also want to open the door to have that conversation with your employer, because holding a grudge is not necessary. It's time to have a crucial conversation. So what is a strategy that you can use to open that dialogue with your manager? Replaying the situation. You want to nip it in the bud, and before you spiral out of control. So you approach the dialogue as you need the help of the other person to help you get the complete picture. So this is called the when I strategy. So you're going to replay the situation as you saw it and as you experienced it, but you use the when I statement. So when this happened, or that happened, when you checked up on me 3 or 4 times, I felt this way and I drew to this conclusion. So that's the when I, but then you want to invite them to tell their story. So can you help me to understand what is happening on your end? Inviting that manager to help you to understand why they are checking up on you 3 times in 1 hour. And then from there, you've entered into some dialogue, hopefully. Another example might be when you don't arrive on time to meetings and you don't deliver the work. That if someone is saying this to you, or if you're saying you've got a teammate who is falling behind, I feel like you don't care about what we're trying to accomplish, but I could be missing something. Can you help me to understand what's going on? So using that when and I invite helps you to not come off as passive or aggressive in the conversation, but instead you're being assertive with the facts of you checked in on me 3 times and you're honestly sharing your experience of how that made you feel, but you're also inviting them to have that conversation with you and to help you to understand it a little better. So that's the when I strategy, and using those statements in dialogue is one of the ways that you can start to approach crucial conversations. So I want to take that and I want to build it on to another strategy that is discussed in the Crucial Conversations training of stating your path. So I've tried to outline that here with the underlining. So it's each of the, there is a word for that, and I totally just blanked on what that's called. You can put it in the chat, and I'll have Chelsea interrupt me if somebody can think of when you've got those.
Acronym.
It's not an acronym. It's called something else. It'll come to me maybe before we end, but stating your path. Okay. So, stating your path is what you see on those. It's a little bit of what you did in the when I statements that you gave in the last example, but you're going to take it a little bit further because it goes a little deeper whenever you get into the importance of the how skills that go beyond that in a crucial conversation of talking tentatively, and also you are encouraging testing, or you've got some kind of follow-up to that dialogue. So, this really comes into play more so when you're having to share tough messages with maybe a coworker or a direct report that you have. And so you're going to start with what you see and hear, the facts about the situation or the scenario. But you want to be very careful that you don't get into talking about your expectations of the person, because those are not facts. And I would say this is another place that, especially at this point in my career, I've really become aware of self-checking expectations of another person and the expectations you have for yourself, because I think a lot of times that leads us down a path of being disappointed and leading to the need for a crucial conversation. And so you want to self-check yourself a little bit first and make sure that you're separating the facts of the scenario from your expectations, because that other person that's involved in this conversation may not be aware of those same expectations. They may not be on that same wavelength that you are. So some examples of some facts would be statements like, the last 3 times we talked about whatever the topic is, or we had agreed that you would report this or turn this into me by 3 o'clock, and now it is 4 o'clock, and you're just now getting it to me. Those are facts in a particular scenario. They're probably the least controversial part of this particular strategy, and because they're exactly that, they are facts. And so then you transition into telling your story. So this is this is where you can get into some of those, maybe a little bit of the expectations, but also where you're coming from your understanding and why you're choosing to enter into this dialogue. Statements like, it leads me to conclude that, or I believe that, or I start to think that. These are your stories that you are implying into this particular situation that you found yourself in. So that's the second part. And then you want to ask for their path. How do they see it? This is, again, I love the phrase of, can you help me better understand? Or what's your point of view of the scenario? And you want to be careful. So when we talk about how you have these dialogues and crucial conversations, you also want to be careful that you're not asking ineffective statements that could be too short or too brief for them to give a response to, because then what you're going to do is you're going to limit the dialogue. And if you remember back to the earlier slide, one of your main goals, once you've identified your common values, your common, like the goals that you're going for, is that you want to continue in dialogue. You want to keep that going until you have found that you've worked the knot out of the rope in the end. And so, examples of some things that you would say that would be ineffective statements could be things like, isn't that the case? Because then they're just going to respond with a yes, no. Or what do we need to do to make sure this doesn't happen again? That can lead to some very short responses and not keeping that dialogue open. So you've shared your facts and you've told your story and you're asking for their path. And throughout all of that, you want to make sure that you're using some tentative words and phrases. And that's what you see on the right-hand side of that graphic. These are examples of positive, tentative statements that you would use, like, I believe that we should do this, as opposed to saying something like, the only reasonable option is to do this. So you want to try to just keep that dialogue open and make sure that you're using some of those tentative type phrases in your dialogue. And encouraging testing is the way that you're going to keep that conversation going. And also you're going to set some expectations of how you're going to check back in to make sure that particular item that you're talking about from a crucial conversation standpoint doesn't continue to re-emerge as a problem later down the road as you're having continue to work with that particular individual. You're not trying to convince or compel someone or control someone. You just want to keep the dialogue going, but you want to have those touch points, encouraging that testing over and over again. And so what I've built into here are a couple of examples that where I would like for us to kind of read through these different scenarios. Hopefully no one has Jimmy on their team who acts the way this one does, because I really tried to be vague. But I'd like for us to pick out some of those first couple. What are the facts about the situation? What is the story that we're telling, to enter into that dialogue, and how can we work with Jimmy to ask for his particular path so we can have this conversation. So you read here that Jimmy likes, he avoids conflict. A lot of people do. That's one of the reasons we're probably having this. You're signed up here today, and he's been assigned an addition. He's on your team, and you've got a little concept about Jimmy. You know that he's not been that reliable in the past, but he'll agree to do things. And as you touch base with him, Jimmy's telling you that things are on track with a particular task or deliverable that he has. And you think, okay, because you've actually kind of become friendly with Jimmy. Y'all are going to lunch every now and again. Um, and so, but he's also got some humor to him, and he often utilizes that humor to dodge or avoid perhaps a crucial conversation or a dialogue that you're having with him. And so he's just missed a deadline and you've reached out to him. So what does that dialogue look like? What are the facts from this particular situation that you're going to share with Jimmy to start that process of having the conversation? So an example of the facts would be that, Jimmy, I noticed you missed the deadline that we talked about this week. And 3 times when we've worked on other projects in the past, you've also missed deadlines. Even though you're telling me that the assignment's on track, I just got an email from you about the current missed deadline, and you're making a joke about it. Those are the facts of this particular scenario as you begin that dialogue with Jimmy. So what is the story how is this, what is your story? What is your vested interest? Because at this point, you've just told him these are the facts. So what is the story from this particular example? Well, Jimmy, the most reasonable option here is that you're going to require some additional training in time management. That's probably not a great example. So I wanted to give you like a what not to say. And some of the reasons that's not is, I hope you all picked up on, that's pretty harsh right there in the beginning. Well, the most reasonable option is that you're going to require some additional training. There's a better way to say that, if that is what you're thinking. So, sometimes people learn by what not to do. So that's not the best way to handle that. This is probably a better way to state the story that you've told yourself. I'm beginning to wonder if you're not comfortable with telling me when something is running behind, and then you're trying to patch it up with humor. That's a better way to use this strategy to having that dialogue with Jimmy. And then what do you want to do next in the process? The A word, you want to ask for their path and get them to have conversation back with you. So asking Jimmy, is that what's going on? So that he can then tell his truth and tell his story about the situation, and you can continue in that dialogue. I got one other example for you. I want to kind of utilize that same strategy for unpacking a little bit. So Karen here, you're part of a small office. I'll tell you all, I've been very blessed in my entire career. I've only ever worked in small work environments. And I think that has helped me tremendously with working with other people, because you tend to be a more tight-knit group when you work in a small environment, as is in Karen's example. Tight-knit group of people, they know, no one is above any particular task. So it's going to take everybody to pitch in. And that small team got together and they agreed that they would rotate some of those, just honestly, those basic things that have to get done, especially in a small office environment. But Karen seems to have something else to do, or she forgets when it's her turn in the rotation. And so at first, you maybe thought to yourself, the timing and her excuse seemed legitimate. but now you're almost sure that she must be doing this on purpose. So that's your scenario with Karen. So what are the facts that you would first start off with to approach Karen and having a crucial conversation? Because you certainly want to address this before things get out of hand in that particular scenario, especially a small office. You know, it gets out of hand, one person gets excluded. That's not what you're wanting. That's not keeping the team environment going. So the facts in this scenario is that the team did get together and agreed to take rotations with some of those jobs. And you've noticed that she's missed 5 of the last rotations for various reasons. Those are the facts. So that's just your first statement that you want to utilize as you're engaging in that dialogue with Karen. What's the story that what are you beginning to assume about the situation? So you understand that people often can miss rotations every once in a while, but when there's 5 in a row, so you're utilizing those facts, pulling them into your story, you start to think that Karen is purposefully trying to get out of doing those jobs. That's a way that you would break that dialogue down into what are the facts, what's the story as you're experiencing it as the other person in the dialogue, and then you want to ask Karen if she can help you to understand what is going on. And you know, you may be able to have a short conversation with Karen because you may be able to very quickly come to the conclusion that she doesn't want to be part of the rotation. And then you can continue on your dialogue and maybe look for a solution. Again, that common goal that you hope works for the whole team. So it's just really, I think this is actually a worksheet if you were to participate in the Crucial Conversations training. I think it's also provided in the book. It is a worksheet for unpacking in preparation for a crucial conversation. And I can tell you that I have actually pulled that worksheet out a couple of times as I have prepared for having a dialogue with an employee, or even in preparing for a performance review with an employee, as well as in some more personal experiences that I've had. And I've just needed to really take that time to think through, okay, how am I going to approach this so that the person doesn't shut me off right from the get-go, and that we can get into that dialogue and address things more clearly. So I want to make a little note here that, you know, there are times when you just have to step back and agree to disagree. I don't want to, you know, I don't think that you should be in this webinar today or this lunch and learn or what you're calling it and thinking that you're going to walk away being able to master and that every crucial conversation that you have is going to have a positive outcome. Because if that were the case, then we wouldn't have all this diversity of thought in the career world. And you want to welcome that, because I think we're certainly, as the generation in the workplace now, you know, we value that, right? So but sometimes you just may have to step back and say, you may have to apologize and say, you know, as you have told someone the story or how you're experiencing it, and they say, you're way off base, that's not the case. Or maybe even like in Karen's example, maybe she hadn't really missed 5 rotations in a row. You never know what, like maybe you've been out and you just didn't look at your calendar correctly or something, and she corrects you. And so I think part of being emotionally intelligent in a crucial conversation is knowing that there are times when you may have to apologize for the statements that you've made, or just come to the realization that maybe you're going to have to agree to disagree, or maybe even say, you know what, let's come back to this at a different time. Tensions have gotten really high. Maybe the timing for addressing this wasn't exactly the best. Can we agree to speak on it at another time? That is part of being, I think, a well-versed person in having crucial conversations. I know we're getting kind of close to our time here, and I wanted to leave some time in case there were some questions, but I think one of the things that gets people or prevents individuals from even starting the process of having a crucial conversation is not knowing how to begin that dialogue, or just being nervous about walking up to someone and really kind of opening that up. And so this gives you this slide that I'm on here just kind of gives you 4 little steps that you want to keep in mind as you're approaching a crucial conversation, and a little bit of a script that you can have as you are approaching that person, and just saying, you want to first start off and tell them, what is your intent? Why are you initiating this conversation? You want to discuss XYZ. In this particular example, the comments from last week's meeting, that maybe they said something that was a little off color in that particular meeting, and just being short and sweet and opening that up. And then saying, I hope that when we leave this conversation, that we will have some understanding that won't happen again, or that those particular comments were not appropriate for our meeting environment. What is your ultimate goal? So this is going back to the intent of the conversation and what you hope to get out of it. The next step in this particular outline that they provide is, it always makes me think of Mark Stewart at AFA, because one of the skills I really think I picked up from him is he was really great about saying, can I give you some feedback? And that is getting my buy-in to be in part of that conversation. And I have found myself utilizing that term way more in this career than I did in my previous 2. And I think that's because I'm mirroring a little bit of that strong, what I think is a good way to get the other person's buy-in and have that crucial conversation with them, and know that they're on board and they feel like it's a safe place for them to have that dialogue with you. And then you also want to make sure that you always have some kind of follow-up on the schedule for how you're going to check back in to see how that person is feeling. This comes into one of the other books offered by Vital Smarts, and some of those same authors, is Crucial Accountability. And I think when you are accountable to things, it helps you avoid future crucial conversations, right? Because you've done that touch point with the other person as well. So that's also important to make note of as you're thinking about having these different crucial conversations with people. So you've gotten, hopefully, a couple of tips and tricks. Honestly, if you walk out of this webinar, Lunch and Learn today, and you just train yourself on one of these, my favorite being, can you help me understand? I find myself utilizing that quite frequently when I maybe disagree with something that someone is saying, or honestly, I'm not quite sure, and I don't want to get carried away with the story that I've told myself in that particular dialogue. I think that's probably one of the most helpful tools in my toolkit from doing being part of doing some of these trainings. But I just kind of put a little recap here about what we've covered today, and I really also want to make sure that you walk away understanding that crucial conversations are not about winning. It's not an argument. I think if you embed that in your mind from the get-go, you'll find yourself much more apt and open to having those dialogues. They're about creating that understanding and the trust, really kind of getting that knot out of the center of the rope. I didn't really spend a ton of time talking about written communication, but that is another place where a lot of times, I mentioned very early that I spend a lot of time in dialogue with my caretakers, and I typically do that via text messages. I'll just be very transparent and tell you that I'm sure some of you are probably already thinking this, but ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever AI that you're utilizing, I think if you've been through this training, it may slow you down and make you think about that text before you send it, or that email before you send it. And I think that's a great tool to utilize in helping craft and edit some of those messages into a dialogue that you can have in written format. So it doesn't always happen verbally. I do think that's when it is, you get the most out of it because the dialogue is a little more open, but you certainly have an opportunity to initiate some crucial conversations through text. And that's another place, you want to be aware of your word choice and the strategies that you're using to have that communication. So that's my content for today. I think I've left a couple of minutes here if there are any questions from anyone about any of these strategies or scenarios.
No one has a question. I have a question, Ashley. I definitely don't
Sure.
want to, I want to give everybody else a chance, but I haven't seen anybody come off mute yet. My question is on your second example, when you talk about the state, and at the very end, you talked about encouraged testing. Can you just
Yep.
talk a little bit more about what that could look like in one of these examples you provided?
Yeah. So like let's use Jimmy for an example. So the testing component or encouraging the testing of ideas, that could be in that scenario is after you've asked Jimmy if that's what's going on, digging in deeper with him or setting a time to say, okay, so how can we best structure the next assignment that we are engaged together on? Because especially if Jimmy gives you the indication that, he is reliable and he can get these things done, asking, after you've had that of like what is going on, the follow-up or the testing of how can in the next project we set up touch points that help us to have success in the end and help you to stay on track with the deliverable that you have. um it's digging into, I'm trying to think of with Karen how you could encourage that testing. It would be a scenario of do we need to, is there a different approach that would help you be more successful at being part of the team? Is there maybe something different than these tasks? Kind of drilling into those specifics of the example. Does that answer your question?
It does. That was perfect. And another quick question for you, unless anybody else has one. Ashley, when you think about the places you've worked, and it doesn't have to be a professional story, of course, it
Yeah.
could be personal too, but like, what's been your favorite crucial conversation thus far?
Oh, so I'm just going to give you a scenario that has, gosh, I feel like I have a better one and it's just not coming to me because I feel like I've had a good one, but I'm gonna talk about the one that honestly just happened yesterday. I have found myself having these moments of, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have said this is going to be a crucial conversation. It would just have been like, this is what Ashley thinks, or this is what, this is the scenario at hand, or whatever. And I'm sorry if I'm for because you guys are so much younger than me. I'm really feeling my where I am in my life, but um, I am finding myself daily in crucial conversations with those folks that are taking care of my parents. And it's the stakes are high because it's people's lives at hand, right? But it's also very expensive to pay for in-home care. And I'm in a scenario where I've got 4 different, very dynamic personalities, and one of those personalities is very critical of the other 3 and communicates to me quite frequently about the behavior of the other people because she's interacting with them and crossing paths with them. And so yesterday I found myself in a scenario where via text I had to state to her the facts of the situation. This is what is happening and I'm aware of them and you have made me aware and I appreciate that very much. um, the story that I told her from a standpoint of my level of comfortability with what her most recent ask was not, I wasn't comfortable with what she was asking for. And then I asked her like the going into the next part about, how was she seeing things? I was asking her scenarios of how could she do differently? How could we accommodate differently for her schedule so that, if this is how you're feeling, what do you think would help it to be better? Instead of just coming with the problem, trying to coach her into coming with a solution as well. And then, trying to keep it very tentative through that whole conversation is important because, uh, I hope no one else on this call. I know Tracy sent me a chat here. We're a little closer in our life experience, but I hope no one else is in this scenario. But the you know, these people will quit on you in a heartbeat. And then you find yourself in a really hard spot. And so, keeping it very tentative so that there's not absolutes, that she may react in a knee jerk scenario. And I really, I'll be honest, it was a text message, and I used GPT to help me polish it up a little bit, because I'm just trying to make sure that I've definitely got some gloves on going into that crucial conversation. But I find it's happening daily in that world. And it's just where I am in my life. And I'm very grateful that I've got some of these strategies and tools in my toolbox. I utilize with her a lot the term, "Can you help me understand?" Because I pick up from her body language, even on the phone, or her tone, where she's at. But when I have her say it to me, it breaks it down a little bit and keeps that dialogue open.
Love that. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. If anybody has one that they want to throw in the chat or come off mute. All right. Well, Ashley, on behalf of AFA, thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us. This has been absolutely amazing. I don't know about all of you, but I have definitely added this book and the many others that you recommended at the beginning to add to my book list. Maybe I can listen to it on my drive home. Thank you very much for your time today, and thank you all for joining us. Hope to see you
Yeah.
at the next AFA webinar series.
Yeah. Thanks. Eat more peanuts.
I will.
I saw your comment about boiled peanuts. They are absolutely gourmet. Yes.
Are they? I have
Well,
yet to have them. It's on my list. I need to eat some boiled peanuts.
I don't know
No, you
how
do not.
I don't know how you're gonna get them.